he's looking up at me and pointing to river left, and he's like, they've got the finger across the throat thing. It's like, okay, yeah, certain death on the left. So I peel out and immediately get pushed left and basically plug the drop and disappear into a frickin' undercut.
Well, you've done it again. You've tuned into another episode of Tales from the Crypts. Today, we'll cover the full spectrum: tales from the river, tales from the ocean, and tales from a garage. So, settle in and enjoy the show. But first, consider giving some love to the folks that have kindly sponsored the show and helped defray some of my costs. Today's episode is sponsored by Four Corners River Sports. To me, Four Corners is exactly what a paddling shop should be. It's staffed with dedicated river people who know the sport inside and out and are all about having fun and getting people outside. Four Corners River Sports is located in Durango, Colorado. They're a full-service paddle sports, retail, and rental store. If you're looking to get on the water, look no further than Four Corners River Sports. Call them at 970-259-3893 or visit their website at www.riversports.com. This episode is also sponsored by Taylor Barker with the Group Real Estate Steamboat. I've known and paddled with Taylor for years, and he brings passion to everything he does. Steamboat Springs is a wonderful town with the Yampa River running right through it and has a vibrant and friendly boating community. If you're thinking of making a move to the Steamboat area or purchasing a vacation home, be sure to get in touch with Taylor. He is happy to give you a lay of the land, the real estate market, and to help find the perfect property for you. You can reach him at 336-314-4353 or by email at taylor@brokerintheboat.com. And you can find those links in the show notes. This podcast is being featured on paddlinglife.com. Paddlinglife.com does a wonderful job of finding all the most interesting happenings in the world of paddling and bringing them straight to you in the form of news, interviews, articles, videos, and more. Check out paddlinglife.com. And in fact, I'll link a few relevant articles from Paddling Life in the notes from the story today. And now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to Tales from the Crypts, a whitewater storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Cripps, and my guest today was suggested to me by the much beloved paddling community connector, Nick Hines. So Nick told me that he had another wild Kiwi that I should talk to. Here's a few paraphrased excerpts of what Nick had to say. He said he'll be modest, but he's got all kinds of stories. Nick said that when he first met him, he was traveling all around the world on a mega yacht working as a mechanic, but that's just a small part of his story. When he was young, he used to break horses in New Zealand. He spent years sailing around the world. In fact, one time when he was sailing in the middle of the ocean, he got caught on a rope and was dumped in the ocean, was almost lost at sea. But he survived. He learned to kayak in New Zealand before he knew how to roll. And he would paddle solo and just self-rescue himself and his gear whenever he'd swim. He's also a wizard with just about anything mechanical, and he can build just about anything. A prime example was that rather than going out and buying a super expensive Sprinter van, he found a cheap Chevy van. He repaired it. He cut the metal top off of an old Sprinter van that he got a hold of, and then he cut it down to fit the Chevy and welded them together, making a primo traveling van for just a fraction of the price. So that's a little excerpt of what Nick had to say about my guest today. But I actually knew my guest, Mike, because I met him myself several years ago. I had a business trip in Seattle, and it was in April, and I thought it'd be criminal to go there in April and not try to paddle something. So I called up some of my usual suspects, and I got a bite from Chase Nobles, who is an old friend from his days in Colorado. And Chase told me that he had a crew and that they had a boat and paddle that would, covered for me. So all I needed to bring on the plane was the rest of my paddling gear. So when I got there, Chase introduced me to Mike, and he's this person I'd never met before. Like never even heard of him, but Mike graciously like provided me with a boat that was in great shape. It was a Zet Toro, if I remember correctly, which is an awesome boat. And he gave me a paddle that he built himself. And I actually wasn't too worried about the Toro because I'd been in one before, but I was a little bit worried about a paddle that I didn't know. But we went out and we concocted a plan to go out to the Ahanapakosh River, which is this classic river that drains off Mount Rainier in the area. And we had a great run, only had a small incident. There's a little waterfall on that run that's probably the signature drop of the run. And at the higher spring flows that we had, there was the line was down the middle. And so Mike probed that line for us, and he got stuffed right in a big hole right above the falls and took a good ride, but he rode it out, didn't seem to miss a beat, paddled off the lip, no problem. And while that wasn't terribly confidence inspiring for me, I at least knew where I should not go. But the rest of that run went great. It made me wish I had more business trips in April to Seattle. Unfortunately, I haven't made another one. But that was my personal introduction to Mike. For people in the Pacific Northwest, he's surely a regular friendly face. Many others will know him from his many years of traveling around as a dedicated paddler in the community. And a few may know him as the owner of Hardcore Paddles, a whitewater paddling company that he runs out of his garage. So without further ado, Mike Nash, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kevin.
So it must be prime paddling season out there in the Pacific Northwest right now. Have you been getting out?
Yeah, I've been getting out a bit. It's been very dry, actually. So I've probably had about 4 road laps this fall, and got up to BC for a trip as well, which was nice.
Yeah, well, I guess it should be prime paddling season. It's just
exactly. But we got rain coming. We got a lot of rain coming.
All right, so it's going to be on.
Yeah, it'll be all on.
Does the road race happen sometime around this time?
No, it's spring. It's
spring. Okay.
Try to do it when the days are a little longer and there's a chance of sunshine.
That makes sense. All right. Well, we've got a lot of stuff to cover today, and we're going to get into everything from paddling to sailing to paddle making. So let's kind of start where it all began for you. You were living in New Zealand. You grew up in New Zealand, and how did you discover kayaking and decide that's something you might want to get into?
Well, I'd actually been away sailing and traveling, and I guess I was in my early 30s, and I'd gone back to New Zealand and lived and moved to the kind of Northland, and I didn't really know what to do with myself, and I was I'd always been interested in kayaking, but sailing had taken over for the earlier part of my life, and I bought an old dancer and had a look on a map and found some rivers and with a few bridges to put in and take out, and off I went basically. And yeah, it sort of slowly progressed from there, and I eventually met 2 guys actually. One was Ian Waterhouse, who was a exceptional kayaker. He'd just come back from, I don't know, a year or so in the Zambezi, taking punters down the Zambezi in a topo duo. So he was he was all about it. And another guy, Neville. I mean, Ian wasn't interested in paddling any class 2, so it was like he didn't really care how good I was or whether I had a role, which I didn't for a long time. But he, and I think he kind of liked the challenge of picking up the pieces, because every time we paddled, I swam at least once, and he chased my boat, and I ran down the shore. And we always joked that we were going out for a triathlon. Well, it was for me anyway.
It was a literal sink or swim introduction to kayaking.
Yeah. And I guess, I don't know, I mean, maybe I'm just stupid, but I guess I never had a bad swim in those early days. So I got to be a very good swimmer. So maybe that aspect of it kind of, to me, it was no big deal to swim at all. It was just part of the day. It was part of the fun. But, I've kind of changed my tune a little bit since then, but I'm still a really good swimmer.
Well, I mean, there's something to be said for that. I mean,
We
we're
all
all in
swim
between
eventually,
swims.
right?
Yeah, when the shit happens, you want to be prepared for it.
Exactly. Precisely.
So before you met Ian and connected with him, you were actually paddling by yourself?
Yeah, I mean, there was just no one to paddle with. It's there's whitewater in that zone, but there was no one around, and it was kind of pre-internet, days, or not pre-internet, but there wasn't, Facebook groups and no one to hook up with. And
how did you even know it was a thing to do? Or did you see people out on the river from time to time? Or
never. It was not like we were, Ian and I and Neville, when he came back from. He was studying down in the South Island, so when he came back on holidays, that was it. It was, yeah. So,
well,
I mean, I found out about these rivers because I looked on a map and like hiked the rivers and had a look and was like, oh yeah, that'll, I'll be able to get down that and maybe.
So you just took your dancer and snapped on your skirt and said, let's see what happens.
Yeah, and I mean, I slowly got slightly more modern boats, but it was hard to find boats. And people did, obviously we're paddling in the central North Island, so I had to, but it was a long trip for me, and I mean, I guess I kind of liked the adventure. I probably was not really aware of the danger either.
Ignorance can be bliss sometimes.
Exactly.
It's a miracle you didn't have an incident, but
well, I mean,
it sounds like after you got past the beginner stage. You did get yourself into some trouble. Yeah,
I mean, I definitely had one. Yeah, probably I would say that definitely without a doubt, the closest near-death experience on the water. Ian and I were I'd actually scouted this run. It was the Waipoua, which is just a river that runs through dense. Subtropical forest bush really in New Zealand, and basically from the ridge or the mountain range. Well, it's not really a mountain range, but down to the ocean on the west coast. And Neville and I had kind of canyoneered it at low water, and it looked to be really good, actually, and it had a 50-footer sort of to start off with, which was certainly runnable, but I wasn't anywhere near ready for something like that. So anyway, I put a kind of flagged the portage for that because it kind of led into it. There was no real pool above the lip. Anyway, it had rained a couple of inches and there's no gauges in that area anywhere pretty much. So you just kind of look at the rain radar and hope for the best and show up. And so, yeah, Ian and I were there. We put a stick at the water level and watched it for a while, and it was dropping. So we were like, well, if it's too high, we'll just stop and wait. So we were pretty amped. We put on and made our way down, did the portage past the 50-footer and got through some other stuff, and I mean, by that stage I had a roll. I mean, I wasn't
that's good.
B class 5 without a roll, but I certainly wasn't a class 5 kayaker. Anyway, we get to a drop. It was probably an 8-foot drop, and we just kind of boat scout it. Ian runs it, the nice pull down below, and he's looking up at me and pointing to river left, and he's like, they've got the finger across the throat thing. It's like, okay, certain death on the left. So I peel out and immediately get pushed left and basically plug the drop and disappear into a frickin' undercut. And it was, the water was flooding. It was super dark. And I pretty much pulled immediately and floated around down in an undercut, kind of, in pure darkness, not knowing what way was up or which way to swim or what to do really, and held my breath for a long time, and eventually realised that I couldn't hold my breath any longer and was probably going to die, and was like, well, I guess, like at some point you breathe water. And fortunately for me, I'm one of they say 30% of people that when water hits their throat, your throat locks up so you don't swallow it or you don't inhale it. And that's what happened. And I lost the urge to breathe and felt pretty relaxed. I guess as your brain gets deprived of oxygen, you kind of slow down. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't actually scary or terrifying or anything really. It was pretty relaxing. And my main concern was that I was a bit of a shame because I wouldn't be able to go kayaking anymore because I was dying. But, and as often happens when you relax and go limp, I guess I eventually flushed out because eventually it sort of started getting light and I realised that I was drifting to the surface and popped out, started breathing again, and it was all good. And all Ian could say was, "Oh, it's not much fun, is it, mate?"
Real encouraging. Did he have any sense of how long you'd been underwater?
Oh, I don't know. Honestly, I'm really bad at like timing. People talk about how long they're down or how long they get a whole ride for or whatever. But as I say, it was a significant amount of time.
It was long enough to relax.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, we found my boat eventually after a lot of bushwhacking on my part, and made it out. And it was.
How was the rest of the run? Was it a good? I mean, was the first?
Yeah, I mean, it was a great run. It's actually now in there's a book of I think it's the 100 runs or 120 runs in New Zealand. It's in that book. So yeah.
And you claimed the first on it. That's pretty cool.
And I don't know if anyone's run the 50-footer yet, but it's good to go.
You would think some crazy Kiwi out there would have run it.
You would think so. Exactly.
So you're actually building up like the perfect formula to be a Class 5 boater at this point. You don't mind swimming and chasing your gear. Now you figured out that like almost dying is a relaxing experience, and the only bummer is you don't get to go kayaking more. So you're primed to like step it up. But you said you told me you have a story about a solo run that you did that maybe taught you a lesson.
Yeah, and I guess that was after that experience. I think I'd been away working on that super yacht, and then I'd gone back, and once again there was no one there. I think Ian was living down the South Island by then, and Nev was somewhere else, and I wanted a kayak, so there's a run there that's kind of more of a bread and butter run. They're called the Mangakahia, which is it's got like a Class 4 plus canyon section, and I knew it really well. At that stage I'd run it many times, and so I went out there on my own, and once again no gauges, so you just hope that it's enough water but not crazy high, and it was crazy high, but I was there, and what are you going to do?
You can't not go kayaking.
Exactly. You've driven 2 hours to go kayaking, you're going to go kayaking. So, and I knew the run, so I was like, well, if I need to port, and everything was portageable, the whole, so, and I was able to pretty much scout the whole canyon, and it was good to go. Like there was nothing, there was no death holes or, there was nothing. It was barely, but it was good to go. So I fired it up and flipped and carped multiple rolls, I guess, and got worked in multiple holes and swam and continued to flush down the river, getting worked in multiple holes, and ran out of energy and pretty much gave up and thought I was going to flush drown. And sure enough, eventually I flushed into an eddy without taking a stroke. So it was, that was a very lucky incident, and I don't think I've really gone solo kayaking again since then. And living where I live now, there's no reason to, and I like the social aspect of kayaking as well. So I'm not one to knock people that want to kayak on their own. It's like I'm the last person to do that, but for me, it's a big part of my social life. So I
Yeah,
like to kayak with other people.
that's a that's a good take on it. No problem with people that want a solo boat,
Yeah.
but why do I need to do that when I have the opportunity to paddle with other people?
Yeah, I want to paddle with other people, especially good people, and there's a lot of good people out there, especially kayakers.
No doubt, a lot of motivated people. I'm the same way. I think almost always prefer to paddle with other people, but sometimes schedules don't allow it, and I'll sneak in
Yeah,
a solo around here and there if it's something I'm comfortable with. But
yeah,
that's a good lesson in not paddling flooded rivers solo.
yeah.
That's
I
an
mean,
extra
that's not a
danger.
good idea. Yeah, that was just stupid, really. Let's be honest.
Were you feeling relaxed as you were about to flush drown? Were you having that same feeling of
Um,
relaxation?
no, I don't really have a. I think it kind of happened pretty quickly, like where I was still probably struggling, but kind of given up. But I was still breathing for sure. So, like, I mean, yeah, and I
Yeah.
did have a PFD on that time. That's something I forgot to mention was on the undercut incident on the first D was we sort of got a good way into the run, and Ian looked at me. He's like, "Oh, where's your PFD?" I'm like, "Oh, damn! It looks like I forgot my PFD." So maybe that's why I flushed out of the undercut.
That was a pretty important omission.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
So if you're gonna go left on that 8-footer, take off your PFD first.
Yeah. Eventually, you'll flush.
I mean, the first D is a pretty cool accomplishment in and of itself, but first D with no PFD, that's
Yeah, it was what do you? I mean, it's a PFD less PFD.
ooh, nice. Nice. But just for the record, you do not support paddling with no PFD, right?
No, I don't support that. But I have seen. There's a video that I've seen. It was a while ago, where a guy was getting recirced multiple times it was a small waterfall, probably like an 8-10 foot drop, and he was coming back into behind the veil, and then he gets sucked in, and every time it would just get. And eventually, he took his PFD off when he resurfaced under the veil, and
No
the
way.
first time he got and he immediately got flushed.
Man, that's
So PFDs stop you from drowning, but they don't let you flush.
that's pretty impressive headspace that he was able to think like, I need to get this PFD off while he's getting
Yeah.
the whole
I
oxygen.
mean, it's out there. I should have saved it actually. I guess it's out there on the interweb somewhere.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one. That's pretty wild. Cool. All right, we'll come back to kayaking, but I think we've got to touch on your sailing because you have some pretty amazing stories from sailing, and you kind of, when we were talking about this before, I thought you actually had a good point. I know a couple people that are into sailing that are kayakers too, and you said that there's actually a lot of overlap in that personality that enjoys kayaking, like the aspects of sailing as well. Like, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I actually know quite a few people that are sailors or that want to learn to sail or that have got sailboats that are kayakers as well. Like, I just think it's the kind of the self-reliance, the adventure, know people, and the using nature or natural, like the wind or the gradient of rivers to get places. I think it all appeals in the same way. I mean, sailing is you get a lot more time to think about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. But
yeah, hopefully
you don't need muscle memory to be a good sailor. But and most kayakers, I would say virtually any kayaker, if you threw them on a sailboat and sent them off to sea, that they would figure it out. So yeah, I think there's a lot that we like about it.
That's always appealed to me, in like my retirement plan is to get a sailboat and just go traveling around. I'm gonna have to learn to sail first, but apparently you just told me I can figure it out.
I guarantee you would figure it out, like no question. Yeah, yeah. It is definitely seems to be something that people do when they retire. But I did it when I was when I was young. Actually, I mean, I initially got. Well, I guess I was pretty keen windsurfer,
Hmm.
and my grandparents had sailboats,
Hmm.
and then I went ocean sailing with other people, and then in my early 20s, I bought an old steel sailboat in Australia and refitted that, and spent like, I don't know, 6. I lived on that boat for 6 years. Most of the time, I was sort of cruising the world pretty much.
Wow. Well, you did it in your 20s because you're smarter than I am, but I'm slowly learning.
Yeah, I mean, it was what I wanted to do at the time, and I wanted to travel, but I kind of, I didn't like airports, and I still don't.
Who does?
Flying is not big on my list. There's something about traveling. When you go from one country to another in a small boat across an ocean, you feel like you earned it. You get time to forget about where you've been, think about where you're going to go, and when you get there, it's a celebration.
Plenty of time for the transition, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
I've always felt that way about flying, where it's like it feels like it's not real, like it's not going to work. That you get on this plane, you sort of go up in the air, and 12 hours later you're in this super strange foreign place where no one speaks your language, and it seems like it's not going to work until you actually walk out of the plane, and it somehow it
Yeah,
does.
yeah, it's surreal, really. I think it is.
Yeah.
That's exactly how I feel.
I liked your comparison to kayaking about being getting away from people. I hadn't really thought about that, but that is one of the things I tend to put up as one of the things that appeals to me about kayaking is
Yeah,
no matter how crowded it is, once you get on the river, it's like your own. You're out there in the vastness of nature, and it's just you have it to yourself. I hadn't thought about that, but it must be the same in the ocean.
completely. And I mean, I pretty much only cruised in third world countries. I was I was on a shoestring basically. I didn't have an income, and I mean, some of the places I visited, I didn't even clear customs or immigration. It was like, you can kind of live as you please, and coming back to kind of a Western first world civilization is, it's a bit of a shell shock.
Hmm,
Yeah,
I can imagine.
yeah, it was good.
Just yeah, just
I
like
thought I was
people.
going to do it for the rest of my life, but eventually I got bored with it.
The world's too small. Huh? Well,
I just needed a new challenge.
there you go. You found one.
Yeah.
Well, it's in multiple ways. It sounds like. But let's get into some of your sailing stories. Some of your better ones, because you have one about a little misadventure in Argentina, just like kayaking. So the best sailing stories are the misadventure stories.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, so Argentina. Yeah, so I was sailing with my girlfriend at that time, and been basically left from South Africa, from Cape Town, heading across, and we were planning on kind of hitting the coast in Argentina, and we were going to go around through Patagonia and back to the Pacific. And it's a long way across the South Atlantic. It's like, I mean, I think it took us 38 days all told, but yeah, it's a
Wow.
long way. And anyway, we're, I guess, 200 miles off the coast of Argentina, and it started blowing, and it got stronger and stronger and stronger. And of course, it was coming from exactly where we were heading. And I mean, I knew through having survived many storms that the seas were gonna get huge. But initially, as is often the case, the wind picks up and it gets really strong, and the seas are still pretty mellow. And so we were down to bare poles, no sail up. That was probably blowing 60 to 80 knots. Boat was kind of heeled over just with the windage and the rigging and what have you, and it was pretty comfortable. And I was getting as much sleep as I could, knowing that I was going to have to be, it was going to be in huge seas and within the next probably 8 to 10 hours, 12 hours maybe. and running, which is what you do when you're in massive seas, because you've got to keep away from the breaking waves and
Sure.
and you have to hand steer because you're in, that sort of a storm. It's pretty full on. So I was checking the conditions every couple of hours, and it was dark. And I was sleeping. We were both sleeping, and had a few waves hitting the boat, which you'd expect. The top start get blown off the waves; they get steeper, but no big deal. And then just out of nowhere, obviously a massive rogue wave hit us, and next thing we were upside down, and
Whoa.
there's crap everywhere. All the floorboards fall out. Bottles of rum broken everywhere. Food, just bilge water, you name it. I mean, naturally, if you know anything about sailboats, the keels are super heavy, and unless they break off, you go back up the right way very quickly. But it's certainly messy.
But you're in the boat. You're not getting thrown
it's
off
closed
the boat.
up, so it's not like you get any water inside or anything. Yeah, it's just.
But everything, the world just went upside down.
Yeah, pretty quickly.
Wow.
And the worst thing that can happen is that you lose your rig. Your rigging breaks and your mast, and then it's attached to your boat, slamming around in the ocean, and you're in massive seas, and you're trying to cut the rigging to get rid of it so it doesn't punch a hole through your boat. But it was a boat that I'd rebuilt myself, so it was kind of overbuilt, so it was pretty solid. So the rig stayed up, and I started running with it, and there's still no, the seas were still, it was just one massive rogue wave. But by daylight the next day, I was surfing. I mean, it was an 38-foot boat, 11 ton, and it was surfing. The waves were, maybe 100-foot crest to trough. And if they caught us right, we were breaking suction and surfing like you do in a playboat in an 11-ton boat going down massive waves.
Wild.
Yeah, with like
wild.
Huge bow wave. And fortunately, it handled well, and I didn't broach and flip, and it worked out. Eventually, we eventually got pushed up the coast to Brazil, and kind of gave up on the idea of continuing to Patagonia, because there was work to be done on the boat, and I eventually sold the boat in Uruguay.
Huh. So when you get flipped like that, how long are you upside down before the boat rights itself?
I mean, it's seconds, really. It's almost, it's not like you're upside down and it stays there. It's just rolls.
It's just the chaos of everything flying around,
and the wave going past you. So it's not. It's a fluid.
There's another comparison to kayaking. When you get flipped upside down, you just roll back up.
Yeah.
But no, neither you or your girlfriend were hurt. Like nothing.
No, we were all
smacked
good.
You.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild. I must be otherworldly to see ocean waves that large.
Yeah, and you're out there on your own, like it's. I didn't feel. I guess I felt confident in my boat, so it was okay. But I can imagine being in a boat that was maybe not so seaworthy, that would be pretty scary.
All right, so you survived getting capsized off the coast of Argentina, made it to Brazil, did repairs you needed, but so sailing life goes on. But you had another pretty interesting trip that was well, actually, tell us how these trips work, because I wasn't familiar with that. But basically, you arranged to take some people across the ocean.
Yeah. So we were in. This is before the capsize, so we were still in the Indian Ocean. And going from Mayotte, which is a small French territory in the Mozambique Channel, to Madagascar. So it's not a long way. It's like 36, 40-hour trip. And it's pretty common for people in sailboats to put a notice up somewhere and get paying passengers, basically, or paying crew, if you like. And, we were always looking for a bit of extra cash. So,
how much do you get for a trip like that? I mean, obviously this was a while back.
I yeah, it's a long time ago. I can't remember. It was enough to make it worthwhile. I mean, you think about the nice thing about people doing that is that they can take a bit of a lot more luggage than they can on a plane. So even if it's the same price as a plane ticket, but they get to take a bunch of luggage, it works out.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So anyway, we put this notice up and we ended up with 3 people. One was a Madagascan guy who'd been in Mayotte and he was heading back. So he was separate. And then there was these other 2 guys that were French guys, youngish. Well, I say young. I mean, they were in their 20s, I guess, maybe 30. And so we, did customs and immigration and all that, and everyone's on the boat and we're out and we're heading across the ocean. The Madagascan's throwing up and feeling sick, and the other 2 guys are just yakking away. And anyway, it turns out that one of the guys, the older guy, was actually a mercenary, and he now lived in Madagascar, but he had all these photographs and stories, and like he'd been locked in a container in Mayotte because his whole crew had been machine gun on a beach while they were staging a coup in the Comores, which is in the same group. It's kind of a bit of a wild territory anyway.
And he was telling you all this while he was
I mean, he had nothing to hide. It wasn't, he hadn't even got charged. He was the boat driver. His team had gone ashore from, I guess they'd left from Mayotte going to the Comores. They'd all been killed on the beach. He was in his boat and he didn't have enough fuel to go anywhere, so he had to eventually hand himself in. And he said they just locked him in a container for a couple of months and then let him go.
That's nuts.
They didn't charge him, or it was just, if you're outside of the law, I guess you don't have to be judged by the law, right? Or punished by the law.
God, that is insane.
Yeah. And the other guy was, he was a bit more clean cut, and but they were both super nice guys. Anyway, we get into port. We go into this little fishing town called Majunga, and I don't know. I know a lot of kayakers have been to Madagascar, so the ones that have been know, but it's a pretty primitive place. I mean, this area, most of the fishing boats were sail powered. They had 50, 60 foot kind of square rigged sailboats, which were cargo boats that they built on the beach, and they were using them to move cargo up and down the coast. It's pretty. I mean, I don't know if it's changed now, but back then it was very primitive. And anyway, we come into this wharf, and there's all these military there, and I thought, they must be doing some kind of a drill or something, and they kind of wave us to come and tie up, and we're like, oh yeah, that's great. They're being nice and friendly, and this looks good. And so we come up, we tie up, and I jump off the boat and go up to shake the guy's hand, and he's like, no, get back on the boat. And I'm like, whoa, there's something going on here.
This isn't quite the welcoming committee I was expecting.
Yeah, it wasn't. They weren't quite as friendly as I thought. And anyway, so I go back on the boat, and they pull these 2 French guys off the boat, pull them out. And there's probably, 15 guys there, military, all standing around with guns. And
wow,
they and this young guy's wearing jeans, and it's 90 degrees. It's roasting hot. We're in the tropics.
Yeah.
And anyway, they pat him down, and then they unbuckle his jeans and pull his jeans down, and he's got hash taped all around his thighs. It's like a scene out of a movie. And
you picked the wrong passenger.
Yeah. So it was like, okay, yeah, that's why we got the military here. And so the military come on the boat, and they want to do a search, and there are these big overweight guys in these big boots, and it's hot, and they're sweating. There's pools of sweat all over the floor, and they kind of have a half-hearted search, and then they leave, and they're like, all right, you go and anchor there, or tie up there, and don't leave. So we were under boat arrest, and then they come back to us, and they're like, you have to take these guys back to Mayotte.
What?
And like, obviously they're speaking in French. My girlfriend at the time was French, and my French was not good enough to. She communicated with them, and she's like, "No, we're not. They're going to kill us. They're not, or take our boat, or we're not going to take them back to Mayotte." And anyway, the story was that the young guy had robbed his boss of cash, and the French government had contacted the Madagascan government and said, "You have to apprehend this guy."
Oh my
And
God.
and they didn't really care. They didn't care about the hash. They weren't even the Madagascan government did not care about two French guys bringing hash into the country. That was the least of their problems.
Right.
And they were kind of annoyed that the French government had basically
they're
forced
just trying
them into doing their dirty work. So anyway, it all worked out in the end, and those guys I guess he got sent back to France, and they let us off, and we had a good time in Madagascar because it's a great place. And that was another story for the books.
So they didn't give you any trouble because it was clear that you were just an innocent bystander here.
Yeah. I think they were kind of annoyed with the whole thing, but after a day or two, they calmed down, and it was all good.
What do you do in Madagascar? What's the thing to do?
I mean, when you're cruising, it's just like culturally, it's super fun, and the marine life is spectacular. It's unbelievable. There's like just the diving and snorkeling and spearfishing and what have you it's unbelievable. So but we were on our way to basically down to South Africa, so we kind of stopped there and then headed down the coast.
Yeah, you must have. I mean, it sounds like you've seen most of the world sailing
well,
around.
A lot of the third world anyway. I didn't go anywhere near Europe or
Well, that's for retirement when you have the money to do it, right?
Yeah. Well, when I was on that super yacht, we cruised through Europe, so it was, and I was getting paid at that point, so that was all good.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue to. I know I'm sure there was some other life in between, but you're transitioning off your sailing life into your current life. So how did you get connected with this? Sound like you had some super rich guy who had some mega yacht that needed someone to take care of it.
Yeah, actually, well, when I went back after sailing, sold the boat, went back to New Zealand and was looking for work and wanted to work in the marine industry, and the super yacht was being built in this little town in New Zealand by this wealthy dude, but he was kind of a cool guy and self-made man, never been to university. His father, he'd actually built the biggest, at the time, it was the biggest pulp and paper mill in the Southern Hemisphere, and he had managed the building of it starting at 18, when he was 18.
Oh, wow.
So he was an exceptional person.
And that's how he made his fortune.
Yeah, pulp and paper. Wow. And
amazing.
The boat was being built as you'd build a sailboat in your backyard. Basically, you rented a premises and had it drawn up and had someone build the hull, and then hired a bunch of people to fit it out and do all the engineering the way he wanted it. And so I was fortunate enough to get to work for. I worked 2 years on the building of it, and it took 7 years to build. And then shortly after that, they'd taken it to Europe, and they were looking for an engineer, and I was looking for work. It was the beginning of the recession, 2009, and they were like, "Well, do you want to be the engineer on it?" And I was like, "Well, I guess so. I've never been an engineer on a $40 million super yacht, but I think I'll be able to figure it out."
First for everything,
yeah. It was not something I'd want to do for the rest of my life, but it was. I spent 4 years on that boat.
4 years.
Yeah,
that's a long time.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't 4 years full time, because I had, like up to 6 months off at a time. But cruised through, Europe and Norway, and eventually went through the Northwest Passage and came down into Seattle. That's how I ended up in Seattle.
Yeah, so you would just have breaks in these ports to do whatever you wanted, and then get back on the boat when it was time to cruise again.
Yeah, I got a bit of time off and did a bit of kayaking in Norway. And I mean, as the engineer, as long as I had everything working and running right, I had there was an assistant that could run all the equipment, and the owner and I got on pretty well, and he was happy for me to get out and have fun, and he like he took shifts on the boat. It was a very unusual, and he flew the chopper. They had a 6-seater Eurocopter that went below decks, and the whole family flew the chopper. They didn't have a
No way.
pilot or anything. And
That's pretty cool. I've heard that it's very difficult to be a helicopter pilot.
Well, I guess, yeah. I mean, they could do it.
That's awesome. Sounds like a super cool family.
Yeah, it really was. And they took the crew flying, and as well. Yeah, it was great.
What an experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you checked out Seattle while you were there.
And, I spent the boat came into Seattle, and the owner knew Seattle, and his brother, I think, had lived there, and the boat was staying in Seattle for 8 months. So the engineer has to stay on the boat. Most of the crew left. There was like just a couple of us, and I pretty much hooked up with the kayaking community very quickly. And as you know, the Seattle kayaking community is a very welcoming community, and
absolutely,
I fell in love with the place. Kayaked my ass off basically, and actually learned how to kayak properly. Well, to some degree, anyway.
People taught you how to boof there, huh?
Yeah.
I feel like that's if you don't have the perfect boof stroke in Washington, you're done for.
Yeah, you'd. That's pretty true.
Well, that's cool. So you started to get around there, and you're like, hey, this is an area I could live in.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I was, by the time, I left and took the boat, helped take the boat across the Pacific, and kind of had enough, went back to New Zealand, and then I was so I started building a house in New Zealand, so I finished that off, and was at a loose end and didn't know what to do with myself. It was spring 2012, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to go back to Seattle. So
nice.
I flew back to Seattle and hung out and spent the spring kayaking and what have you, and very met my wife Irene, and we got married fairly quickly, and I've been here ever since, and life is good.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So amazingly, this is some credit to you. You hadn't really had any bad experiences paddling, any noteworthy experiences paddling in Washington that worth telling about for life or death situations. But you had a pretty interesting story going up to BC with your brother at some point.
Yeah, when I first got here, my brother was living in Scotland, and I was able to get a few weeks off before the crew left, so I took advantage of that, and he flew out, and I bought an old van, and we went up. It was I guess it was September, and there was no rain down here yet, but BC was getting wet, so we headed up there, and we didn't have any beta much. We spoke with Denny and Annie, and we had a map, and they gave us some beta, and we didn't really hook up with anyone much initially. But anyway, we got up there, and we got up to, the only thing that was in was Fair Canyon, and we were itching to boat. It was late in the afternoon, but we got up there, and we were like, well, it's roadside, how bad can it be? It was only 80 CMS or something, which is supposedly on the low side, but it's still a decent amount of water.
Fair enough.
And we were both shitty kayakers, and so we put on, and it went okay until Andy swam, and his boat went over the horizon line, and he ended up on the river right on the opposite side of the road, and it was kind of a cove that we couldn't really get out of. Well, he couldn't. I couldn't tow him across the river. We didn't have a throw bag long enough, and he couldn't get far enough upstream that I could safely tow him across the river without going over the horizon line. And I think the cove stopped us. It was cliffed out, so we couldn't scout the horizon line.
No.
And so the only option seemed to be that he was going to walk downstream on River Right to the bridge, which, we didn't think it was that far. But anyway, he spent the night out because he didn't make it. And he wasn't all that warm. But he survived. And anyway, in the morning, I guess he found somewhere that he could swim across the river because I was driving up and down the road looking for him. And he came stumbling up from the bush.
You must have been a bit worried at that point.
Well, yeah, I mean, there wasn't much I could do, but I was hoping for the best. And, we found his boat and his paddle, and it all worked out. So, yeah, that was the intro to boating in BC. Don't listen to the locals.
Words to live by. I've heard enough of these accidental overnight stories that I think twice about like not having something to keep me warm in my boat if there's any chance that I might be stuck out for the night.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good plan.
All right. So you mentioned you got married, changed your life quite a bit. I'm sure you've been living a somewhat nomadic life and got a couple dogs. You're trying to integrate your love for boating into your life with your family here. So you have this great. We'll have Paddling Life has a little write up on this too that I'll link in the show notes. But you're trying to figure out like, how can I take my wife and two rather large dogs along with me? And you figured out a solution actually. So what was the process?
Yeah, so this is a recent thing. I mean, my wife's we met kayaking, and we've done a lot of kayaking together. And fairly recently, last 3 years ago, we got some new dogs because they're old dogs, which were getting old and couldn't do much. We got a couple of new dogs, and they are, they're mountain climbers.
Shot the old dogs, and they're.
Well,
no, maybe I shouldn't get into that. I was just joking, but
we nursed the old dogs as long as we could, and they had a humane death when their lives were
what we all wish for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if someone could do it for me, I'd be happy. I guess it's illegal.
I'm 100% behind you on that one. Yeah. It's becoming.
So anyway, we'd been like wanting to do multi days with the dogs, and we borrowed a raft. And we tried that, and it's kind of a lot of work. And I don't really like rowing a raft, and it's pretty limited. You can't do runs with portages and the whole thing. And then we thought, I'll try a hard shell, and did a little bit of training with the dogs, and they were like pretty good. But, I don't know if you've paddled a hard shell canoe with two, 50, 60 pound dogs and a bunch of gear. It's like, and with no spray cover, it's kind of treacherous.
And you were trying to do more than just paddle down some class 2 float trips.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the way I roll. So I mean, it's a class 2 float trip would be fine, but anything more is a little bit challenging. So anyway, I eventually came across a inflatable canoe, which you don't seem to be able to buy here in the US, but this is an Austrian company called Grabner make one. It's like a 14-foot long canoe, basically inflatable canoe that you kneel in, and I paddle it with a double blade.
It's designed for whitewater.
It's designed. I mean, you can paddle class 5 whitewater in it. It's amazing. It's So this last summer we did a bunch of multi days. We did all of the North Fork. All of the South Fork Payette So right up the top, it's like a 50-mile stretch, the canyon,
Yeah.
Portage, Big Falls, ran all of that. Flipped once, which I thought was pretty good considering.
It's pretty
Dogs,
good.
yeah.
Was it a decent flow?
It was no, I would say it was a good low flow. I mean, I wasn't
Okay.
trying to do anything. I was like trying to do everything low. Like,
But still, there's some class 4 in there, I would say, right? Like,
definitely. Like we flipped in the section below Big Falls. Like there's a couple of horizon lines that come up on you quick, and just was in the wrong spot. But yeah, the dogs like it. They like swimming, and it's like it seems like they're more excited about things if we flip and they get to swim and self rescue and all that.
Just like raft guys trying to get a tip, right? You got to dump a couple people out of their raft.
Exactly. Yeah, and then after that we did the South Fork salmon, which was. It was too low. Basically, I'd done it a few weeks before with a bunch of guys, just myself without the dogs, and it went super well. Like absolutely
in the canoe
on my own with a bunch of gear. Like ran everything at 3 feet. No,
this was like a trial run.
Yeah. I wanted to see how it would. I wanted to try it out. And I went back with Irene and I and the dogs, and it was much lower. It was like 2.2, and it was just too low.
Oh, okay.
And so I was getting broached and pinned, and yeah, it was a little challenging, but we got down it. It was adventure, and
next time you'll go at 3 feet, and it'll be perfect.
Well, I think probably 2.7 would be the ideal for me and the dogs and all that.
You're getting the level dialed.
Yeah, exactly.
I just did that run for the first time this past spring, and it was it was like 5 feet or
whoa,
and that was
game on.
I can't really picture it at the low flows because it was just felt like big water. Yeah.
Damn, I hope you had a good guide.
Not really. No, I mean a couple of people had done it several times, but actually the funny thing was we did pretty good for the most part, but the last rapid, what's the name of that thing?
Yeah, I think it's Elk Creek, is it? Or Falls Creek? Falls Creek.
Yeah, Falls Creek. We I was actually, it was funny because we were looking for the little creek coming in on the right, and I think we were all putting our eyes over there and looking for there's supposed to be a little trail. And I just remember we came into, there's some pretty busy rapids before that. And we came into something, and there was a big hole, and someone boofed left, like kind of just on the corner of the hole. Yeah. And so there was an eddy back there. So we all followed, and then I'm kind of looking behind us. I'm like, man, I'm very worried about this last rapid, because if it's, this isn't even the named one, this thing seems pretty damn big. Yeah. And so we've all ferried out, and we ran this rapid and get to the bottom, and our guide's kind of like, I think we just ran Falls Creek. Wow. I hope we did, because I don't want to run anything bigger than that.
So you ran Falls Creek at 5 foot without scouting it.
Yeah.
Damn. That was interesting.
But other than that, it was controlled. Everyone had a good time. No issues. Wow.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I've done it multiple times, but I've never done it that high. I think 4 feet, I think, is the highest I've done it. Okay. And even at 4 feet, it's got plenty of water.
Yeah, it was maybe in there. I think it was kind of like dropping while we were on it, but I guess it's kind of my understanding is it's a bit of a barometer too, right? Because it's depending on which creek is inputting more at a given time.
Yeah, I guess.
5 feet can mean different things, different years.
Yeah.
But whatever it was big water fun. It was pretty cool. Yeah.
Sounds like a good trip.
Yeah. But anyway, that was sidetrack, but that's cool. That I'll definitely link that. I think in that article it has a link to where you got that and the name of the canoe and everything. Yeah. Sounds like a pretty cool craft. I've never seen one of those before.
It's not cheap, but it's high quality.
Okay, so one of the things, as promised, we want to allocate some time to talking about paddles, because as I alluded to, you for I said you were smarter than me, but in some cases you're not as smart as me, because you started your own paddle company, which obviously must indicate some naivete. But we want to use this opportunity to pick your brain for all the things you've learned, and I'm gonna I'm going to go ahead and say that I think that there's interest out there in the paddling community about all of these details because, the Hammer Factor was this very popular podcast that I don't know if they're done, but they haven't published anything for a long time. But they were an awesome podcast, and I'm sure you know some of those guys living out in the Seattle area where you do. But people they had this running joke in the podcast, right? That they were a little bit tongue in cheek about it, but they were very opinionated about what the perfect paddle was, what the perfect feather was, what the right shape was, the right diameter was, the right length, of course. And it seemed to attract a lot of interest in the community because everybody seems to have their opinion on this. So we want to move beyond this is right because I say it's right because it feels good, and move on to really understanding some of the technicalities of what goes into a paddle. Sound good?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I've learned a lot over the last few years.
There's a good chance that you're more than an expert than 99.99% of the people listening, if not greater.
Positive.
So, but let's talk about the inception of this paddle company. How did you get interested in building your own paddles? And actually, maybe before we talk about that, what's your background in building things? Because we've talked about that. I think people probably gotten the impression you said you built a house, you worked on a sailboat, you managed a yacht, all the mechanics that go behind that. What's your background, and how did you build up this set of knowledge?
So I did a 4-year or 9,000 hour apprenticeship I started when I was 17, I guess. And it was there's not something that I know of that's similar in the US, but it's basically a very broad engineering, practical engineering apprenticeship. So you learn everything not everything, but you learn the basics of machining, hydraulics, pneumatics, problem solving, just basic practical engineering. And
what do they call it in New Zealand? What's the term?
So the name is I am a fitter and turner, and it's an English thing, I guess. So anyone who's any English or any colonized country like Canada, they know what it is. They have the same trade: Canada, Australia, New Zealand, England. So yeah, it's a pretty well known. And I think maybe a millwright is probably somewhat similar in the US. And yeah, when I started sailing, and got in the marine industry, then I kind of branched into the marine side. But I just learn what I can, and we got the internet now, so it's much easier.
You can just YouTube it.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. So at some point, though, you decided you wanted to try making your own paddles. What got you into that?
Well, to be honest, I didn't actually decide that. It was so my brother Andy, who is a composite boat builder, and is currently studying engineering, actually, because he kind of got bored with that. But I also kind of got him into kayaking through the jump in the deep end technique. And but anyway, he was pretty convinced that he could build a better kayak paddle, or at least a kayak paddle, and he mucked around for probably 4 years, to be honest. And the concept of the cedar core shaft actually came from a lot of composite boats use cedar core. I mean, a lot of kayakers have seen cedar core or cedar strip plank, cedar canoes. So they actually use that same technique for big boats. You can build a 50, 60 foot sailboat with that technique, or, a planing boat. They will use cedar core for the planing surfaces because it's hard. adheres super well to the epoxy. You can put however many layers or whatever you want of Kevlar, fiberglass, carbon over it. It's super stiff, it's strong, it's light, it's stable. And
Can you explain what that means to those C decor?
well, essentially, it's if you're making a boat, you basically have like strips that are say an inch or inch and a half wide, multiple strips all glued together on edge to make the form of the boat.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, like it's just cedar. It's like you can hit it with a sledgehammer and you'll have a hole in it. But it's super stiff and rigid and holds its form. And then you cover that inside and out with composites, whatever you want, and you have something that has the rigidity of steel and like it's super strong and light and stiff, and if you put Kevlar on it, it's impact resistant. So that was his idea. I guess he knew about that, so he was like, I'm going to make paddles with shafts like this, which he
did. Sounds like that gives you a lot of flexibility in the properties you can get out of it, depending on how you layer that core on top of that core.
Exactly, and like the thing when you've got a solid core, like with a hollow shaft, it has to have a thick enough layup that it doesn't deform, because when you flex something that's hollow, it wants to turn oval. So it's not just compression and extension, it's also, so when you've got something that's solid that doesn't deform its shape, then you've only got compression and extension when you flex it. But when you've got something that's hollow, it has to hold its form to stop it turning into an oval and then collapsing.
That makes sense.
So you kind of and it also has a different rebound, something that's solid as opposed to something that's hollow. It really is quite a different I don't know, a different construction and different characteristics.
So if I pick up a wood shaft that most people, I don't know, a Jimmy Sticks or whoever else is making wood paddles these days, is that usually a solid core then?
Well, yeah, I mean it's solid wood, but honestly it's probably as dissimilar to our shafts as what a hollow composite shaft is, because it's a solid piece of wood that has fibers running through it all the way through. It doesn't and it doesn't have any composite on the outside, so it's going to be much more flexible. I mean, all wood shafts that don't have composite on them, to my knowledge, I would say are more flexible than our shafts that have an outer core, an outer sleeve of composite.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I was trying to differentiate what's out there today, versus this idea, and it sounds like you have hollow core that's just all composite, and then you have solid wood, but no one's ever tried to bridge the two.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there was one company, I think it was in Oregon somewhere, that was making a very similar thing. They had a cedar shaft with fiberglass sleeves over it, but they actually made it hollow, which kind of defeated the purpose, I think. And I know that they had problems with them breaking, and I know it's no longer they're no longer making those paddles. So, yeah.
Okay, so your brother actually got this idea, and he roped you into it.
Yeah, well, he and over the years messed about with it and messed about with the design, and eventually came up with a pretty nice prototype that he gave me and said, try it out, see what you think. And at that point I'd had tendonitis for like at least 2 years, chronic tendonitis, both elbows. I'd tried a variety of bench shafts. And as most people probably know, virtually every bench shaft you buy is all carbon. So it's a pretty damn stiff shaft anyway. I mean, it's a hollow shaft, but it's and usually they've got foam core blades on them, and foam core blades don't flex at all. If they flex, they'll delaminate, which sometimes they do, especially the thinner ones, because foams can only. I mean, the epoxy glues to the foam just fine, but eventually the foam breaks if they get enough hits. But anyway, so although you have the ergonomics of in a bent shaft, you also there's like the ergonomics, the things that make a paddle easier on your body is good ergonomics. So meaning that your hands are in the right space, in the right place in regards to your shoulder, your wrists are at the right angle in regards, your hands in regards to your wrist. And then there's the flex. And then there's, if the paddle is not well balanced and you have to grip it, that's terrible for tendonitis. So a super well balanced paddle helps a lot. And yeah, ergonomics, flex, and balance basically are the things.
When you say balance, what are you looking for in terms of balance?
Essentially, you should be able to pull on a paddle without gripping it and push. So pull when you're doing a stroke, and it shouldn't flutter.
Okay.
If it's well balanced, you don't need to grip it.
That makes sense then, why that would affect tendonitis, so you can have a lighter grip throughout the stroke. Exactly.
Yeah. And I know people who have had tendonitis from wringing out a tea towel because they were gripping and twisting. It's
I can greatly sympathize with the tendonitis, because I went through, a year and a half, maybe almost 2 years of dealing with that in my right elbow. And I don't think I ever took it seriously until I actually had it. And I kind of did the dumb thing and tried to just work through it. And that doesn't work. It just digs you into a deeper hole. And It took me a while to get out of the hole. But yeah. And paddling is hard on it. Whenever I went in for PT or talked to a doctor and said, well, I'm a paddler, like how will tendonitis work with that? And they're kind of like, yeah, that's the last thing you're going to be doing is getting comfortable paddling. Yeah. So, all right. So, I guess your experience with the paddle is like this thing. This thing helped your tendonitis.
Oh, like within 2 months, I guess. I don't remember exactly, but in a relatively short period of time, my tendonitis was completely gone, and it has never come back. And so anyway, so that was the thing. So I'm pretty stoked on that. And he was like, well, like, I'm in New Zealand and there's no market for it. How would you feel about going into making paddles, and we can kind of have some kind of a business arrangement, some kind of a partnership. And at that time, we'd recently moved out of Seattle and out to Gold Bar, where I am now and where we are, and I kind of was looking for something. I hate commuting, and I didn't really want to work. I'd been doing real estate, helping my wife with real estate.
Oh.
And that kind of, she's still doing that. But I was like, yeah, okay, maybe the paddle thing would be a good thing. And we talked about, he'd had his ideas for machinery and had made some sort of basic machinery that worked. And we decided that we'd basically go ahead and do it. And I started building the machines, and pretty much had all the machines and a press, a blade press, all set up. And he came out, and then he was out here for a year. So people that think that making paddles is easy. So yeah, Andy kind of convinced me into going into business with him, and I pretty much built the machinery. So I built a machine that machines the shaft. It's not computerized because I don't like computers. I'm kind of old school. And having said that, the machine that I've built that's been running for at least 4 years has not given any problems because it doesn't have any electronics. It works perfectly. I've made
There
a
you
few
go.
improvements, but and yeah, Andy came out and we didn't actually have blade molds at that point, but we knew, or we thought we knew, or he thought he knew how to make them out of from composite. I mean, most, as far as I know, all paddle makers, their molds are, they're drawn up on CAD and machined out of aluminium with a CNC.
Mm-hmm.
Neither of us had that expertise. Neither of us, we didn't want to put the money into that, and we thought that we could make molds, composite molds, much more cheaply, which is true, but it's very time consuming.
Wow.
And, but anyway, that's what I use now. So they're essentially,
What is it made out of then?
So it's basically just a variety of composites. The skin is a tooling gel coat, so it's a super hard, high temperature gel coat, and backed with other stuff. But the essential mold making process is that you make the blade exactly how you want it, and then you take a mold from the both sides, and it's kind of complicated, and then you've got to make the spine as well, and that has to fit, and everything has to fit nicely, and you can't have too much thickness of resin because it exotherms and boils, and you basically get bubbles within the blade, and it's something that's really hard to control, and you can't see it, and it's complicated. But it took us a year, or at least 6 months, and Andrew stayed for a year to be up and running and making and selling paddles. So it was
working like daily on this effectively.
Yeah, at least 8 hours a day. I mean, I wasn't working every day, but Andrew was working every day. 5 days a week, pretty much. Like, people that think that making paddles is easy have just no one. Werner doesn't think that making paddles is easy. It's not easy.
If you've tried it, you've learned that it's not easy.
Yeah. So
that's intense.
Yeah, and then he left, and I took over and have spent really, even up until now, improving. I mean, the design has not changed, but the way that I make them has kind of changed fairly significantly. Like, they're lighter, they're stronger, they're more durable. I had some issues with blistering in the heat, which I've figured that out. I feel like now the paddles are actually pretty much as good as I could make them. But maybe a different new products come up all the time, and like sometimes you think of something, and
somebody introduces some new material.
Yeah.
So what are the things that you modified then to make all those changes to get them lighter, to get them stronger?
I can't. Some of them are secrets.
These are proprietary things. You can tell me afterwards.
And I can tell you, like, if you Google how to make a paddle or how to do compression molding, you will find absolutely nothing on the internet, because the only people that do compression molding are businesses, and they do not talk about what they do. The people that sell the products that you use for compression molding can't even really give you much advice. It's like you got to figure it out on your own. And when you started off by not having anything to do with the industry, it's not easy.
Wow. But these are you're using the same mold that you created originally, and it's still going strong.
Yeah, they're still going strong. So one of the shafts we started off, they were all laminated with unidirectional carbon in between the outer layers, and now they are basically solid or scarfed bits of cedar with a combination of fiberglass and carbon on the outside, and they basically have similar stiffness. They're lighter and they're stronger. And that's just going back to not going back to but something that people don't understand. They see something that's carbon, they think it's carbon, it's stiff. Well, there's a lot more to it than that. There's the way that the carbon fibers lay on a shaft, for example. If they run longitudinally, it will be like stiff as a piece of steel. If they run biaxially, which ours do and most do, in fact all, I think, then you have some flex, and then but if it's all carbon is actually really it doesn't stretch at all, and it's really strong, but it's not that tough, if you like. So it fatigues easily, and if it's damaged and it starts cracking, it's likely to crack all the way.
Right.
So you tend to mix carbon with other composites to get the best out of it, but you have to mix them in such a way that they work together. So if you, for example, used fiberglass and laid it the same direction as carbon, fiberglass stretches more than carbon, so the fiberglass is not going to do anything because the carbon is doing everything until it breaks. Only the fiberglass. So you have to get everything to be the way that the fibers run, so that they work together to give you the stiffness and the strength. And there's not a formula for it. You just have to figure it out and test it, and you kind of know roughly, but you can't calculation for it. Well, I can't, that's for sure.
So a lot of this was just done trial and error. Try one thing, see how it feels.
Totally.
Try another. Yeah.
And try to make, like, we made multiple testing machines, but it's really hard to judge how much flex are certain people putting on a paddle. It's like, how far do they flex it? And that's the thing with carbon.
Sure.
You can flex it millions of times to a certain flex and it won't fail. But if you're flexing it past a certain point, it will fail. And different people, different weights and heights and lengths of paddle, the whole thing. So we actually now make our paddles that are in the smaller range, or from like 197s down, we use a slightly lighter layup, which also makes a lighter paddle, and it's also shorter, so it doesn't have as much length. So your actual flex change. If you use the same layup on a long shaft as a short, your longer shaft would be more flexible than the short shaft. So we have a cutoff point where we've figured out, okay, a heavier layup for paddles that are longer than this, it works. It gives it the right stiffness and the right strength. And shorter than this point, we use a slightly different layup to achieve the ultimate, for both, lengths of paddles. So that's something that I figured out slowly but surely.
And I know you offer different levels of fly. Like, I think you have a couple different offerings of how flexy the paddle is. So I assume that layup then determines if someone wants more flex in their paddle, that is the difference in how you're laying those fibers.
Well, it's actually only in the mat-eye, which is the one that is laminated, and it has a fiberglass sleeve, so you can see the wood. So the Mangu, which you see, which is just the carbon sleeve, that only has
those are the model names of the paddles.
Yeah, that's the model. Yeah, so the carbon sleeved solid cedar core shaft only has one flex.
I see.
But and I think it's like the perfect flex, basically. I mean, I've had chronic problems with tendonitis, and I use that paddle, and I have no problems with it at all. So the other one that is the where you see the the cedar layers, we use unidirectional carbon or fiberglass in the outer layers, and that does give a slight difference in stiffness, but it's not huge. When we first started out, we were really trying to make, we thought it would be a nice thing to have quite a different flex option, and it really is hard to make a very flexible paddle that is also really strong. And we also found that because, like we were comparing what we knew of paddles, which is what, virtually all other paddles are made. They're like a hollow shaft and either a foam core or a non-foam core blade.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't kind of realize that in an actual fact, the way that we're making the shafts and the blades have a certain amount of flex in them too, compared to a foam core blade. So overall, you're actually getting a really nice amount of flex, even though it's super stiff, because everything is flexing a little bit, but it's not sloppy, and it's a lively feel. That's, most people, like when you put weight on it to pull for a boof, it flexes a little bit, but it actually lets go and gives you some spring, gives you some pop off a boof without it kind of being, something that flexes a lot and doesn't have that pop. You don't really get that spring.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing to talk about, because we talked about that a little bit previously off the air, but I'd always, there is, I feel like in the paddle industry, there's a little, even if you just look at the lineups or something, and this is the premium paddle, and this is the intermediate paddler, and this is the beginner paddle, right? It seems to equate stiffness with the quality of the paddle, and whether, you're an expert paddler or not. If you're an expert, you want the stiffest paddle possible. And I mean, I never liked that just from an ergonomic standpoint. But I also thought it was somewhat erroneous. Just, I mean, for one, like I don't know, most whitewater paddlers, do they really need that extra 0.00% of, like energy going into their paddle? But two, it never made sense to me because of what you're saying, right? It flexes, but that power still has to go somewhere. I mean, there's, I'm sure, a small amount of energy lost in the flex itself, but that the thing flexes back, it doesn't stay permanently flexed. So that energy comes back to you through your stroke, right? Which I think is what you're saying here.
Yeah, precisely. And, like you're talking about, I mean, there's so much to it, like outside of just of flex. When you talk about an intermediate paddle, which maybe you would consider, or I would consider, like a fiberglass blade Werner to be, in that range, in that realm with a fiberglass shaft. Well, the fiberglass shaft, for a start, it doesn't have enough pop to have the, that same, like it's just not quite enough to give you that. And it's, I don't know how to explain it, but I'm sure you've probably felt that. And the other thing is that the blades flex, and it's not that they're flexing longitudinally, they're flexing, the wings are flexing. So when you put a huge amount of force on them, it's spilling even more water, and you don't get that back. You lose that. So like it's
where it flexes is important.
Yeah. It's like, whereas our blades, they do not flex sideways, or not noticeably, but they flex a little bit longitudinally because the way the spine is made, is enough taper at the end, and it's thin enough that it can flex. Whereas, for example, a thick foam core blade, it can't flex and it doesn't flex. Whereas like the thinner you can make the spine, the more it will flex, but then you have to put a lot of unidirectional carbon in it to make it strong enough so that it can flex without breaking. And that was one of the things that that was something that we also modified. Was we used to make the spines, and when I'm talking about, I don't know if other paddle makers call it the spine, but it's pretty obvious. It's the ridge that runs down through the center of the blade.
Right.
That's what we call a spine. And
I don't have a better name for it.
No, exactly. I think it's a good name. So that when we started out, we were making that out of cedar. So we were machining that out of cedar.
Oh.
And like as regards to flex, it's really irrelevant because it would flex enough. But it was heavier than, it was hard to make and time consuming. And it was kind of heavy, so we were limited to how much carbon we could stick on either side of it, which is ultimately what makes it strong and gives it the flex that you want.
Mm-hmm.
So I swapped that to, I figured out a way to make spines by not machining them as everyone else does, and I'm not going to tell anyone how I do it, but it's a secret. But anyway, they're tough and they're light, and they're certainly easier to make than a cedar spine. And it also allowed me to put a lot more unidirectional carbon in the spine, which has also made them a lot like stronger. Like it's rare that they, like in the first iteration, like the first year or so, that definitely feel like there was a few more that broke, you know, probably 3 or 4 inches up from the tip of the blade on the spine. And now it is really rare. Like they're really tough, and they've got a good amount of flex, which, you know, they flex, our paddles flex from tip to tip, not just on the shaft.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. Well, I want to get more into the properties of the paddle and the trade-offs and whatnot, but I guess let's kind of finish off the business part of it, because you said that you sort of took it. Your brother being in New Zealand said, "No, you've got a better opportunity there. You took it over. But you still have a little bit of a partnership with them. I mean, are you running the business mostly on your own, or do you have help?"
So I mean, I'm pretty much on my own. I mean, Andy set up the built the website, and he kind of does that, deals with that when I need it, and my wife helps a bit, and she helps with other computer stuff because I'm a dummy when it comes to computers, but and I'm not really that interested. And in the early days, we Natalie and Leaf got on board super early, and he, being the size and strength and the paddler that he is, paddling a lot, it was I don't think we realized it at the time, but it was the absolute ideal situation to have someone that could do to a paddle in 6 months what most people would take like 3 years to do, and more. And he did. He broke shafts like from fatigue. He would break them within 6 to 9 months, and
oh wow,
and just because of the fatigue, they like him, like other people wouldn't. I know people have got paddles that use them regularly, that they're from the same generation that are still going strong, but.
And for people that don't know, like Leif Anderson, right? Like this guy, I mean, I know him because he was in Colorado for a while, but this guy is like, 6'7" or something like that. 6'7", huge guy. I don't know, well over 200 pounds. And if you see a huge guy with a big mullet casually dropping into some class 5+ making a bad joke, then you've seen Leif. But he is, and he must paddle 200+ days a year. Lives right there on the White Salmon, and
I mean, he's toned it down.
Ultimate tester.
Yeah, he's toned it down a bit lately, but certainly when we were in the early days, he was paddling probably around 200 days. And I remember actually the first time I met him, and I kind of was like, "Who the hell is this guy?" Because we were down on the White Salmon, on the Little White, with a Seattle crew, and the Seattle crew are kind of looked down upon by the Hood River boys that are charging the Little White, because we're always swimming and taking our time and what have you, but we don't give a shit. But anyway, Leaf was there, and while we were all messing about and deciding whether we were going to run Spirit or not, he'd run it 5 times. So he's
sounds
a beast.
about right.
Yeah. So that's so Leaf and Natalie as well. Like I think she's been a big help in that sense in the testing and she's had some tendonitis issues, and she actually went to a small shaft and it fixed it, which for me is kind of unusual because mostly they say to, the physical therapists say to make, your grip bigger. I played squash for a while and got tendonitis doing that, and they're like, put an extra wrap on your, and it's all about the twisting basically. But anyway, it worked for her. So, so that's pretty cool.
They're also prolific play boaters. I mean, was that an aspect of kind of getting a different discipline mixed in and seeing how it works there?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is, we were trying to make a paddle that was an all-round paddle because, the masses, most kayakers don't have a specific playboat paddle and a specific creaking paddle. I don't.
I don't either.
And you know what I mean? But it was just, I guess, chance really that they are both creekers and both playboaters, prolific playboaters, busy playboaters. And, not far down the line, I asked Leaf, I'm like, well, do you think we should make a different blade for playboating? And he's like, well, I don't know what you could do any different. It seems just, seems really good just as it is. So it's like, I'm not a playboater. I don't know what to do to make a playboating blade. What?
Hey, that's a good answer. If he's happy with it, that's a good
answer. Exactly. Yeah. And there's been a few other, there's a few local playboaters over on the east side in Wenatchee that, the two best playboaters basically that live there. And they both use hardcore paddles and they're completely stoked on them. And so, yeah, I don't think our paddle is Natalie uses them for racing and she seems to do pretty well, but there are paddles.
Race, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's paddles that are better for racing for sure, but it's a pretty good all round blade, I think. Yeah. So that's Leaf and Natalie, and I've had a few others that have kind of been on board with promoting them a bit. Nick Wigston kind of adopted them and has been using them a bit, and then in the last couple of years, I guess, Benny Clark. I don't know if you know of him. Andy met him in Ecuador. Actually, he's from Canada actually, and he discovered kayaking kind of later in life in his 30s. Is a little bit the same mentality as me. Well, as what I did have, and he's so he's really sort of taken over the our social media stuff. So he does does some posts and that for us, and
a good compliment for you.
Yeah. He struggles with mental illness, and he helps out other people with it. He deals with it amazingly well. He's lived with it his whole life, and I feel like it's a really, the kayaking community. It seems like there's a lot of people that have mental health issues that are drawn to kayaking for, it seems the same reasons, I guess. And so I think most kayakers are pretty aware of and well, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. Yeah, they're aware of it, and they're sympathetic and empathetic often to people in those situations. But yeah, I really enjoy my contact with Benny and what he does for hardcore paddles. It's actually a really nice part of it. And actually,
that's super cool.
Yeah, you haven't asked the question, but one of the things that I really enjoy about the paddle making, it's certainly not the most lucrative business.
Shocking.
But yeah, the contact that I have with people, the fact that I sell paddles direct to people,
Yeah.
And, 99.99% of the people that I deal with on a daily basis are just awesome people. And it really is, it's a big part of my life. And I realize, like being at home, working from home, kind of living out in the foothills of the mountains, it's like my social life apart from kayaking is fairly limited. So having like daily contact with people from the
Connection with
outside world is a nice thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think for most of us, right? Like that's one thing I never thought about when I got into paddling, but I think most people that have gotten into it have made close friends and just enjoy the community and the people in it. Like you said, the people are unique. Like you get a different sort that gets attracted to paddling, and for whatever reason.
No question.
It's the mental illness aspect is interesting because I guess I won't say any names yet, but I'm talking to someone about doing an interview here, hopefully in the near future, and that has a medical background, and said that they're like, for the first time ever, the U.S. has basically put out a mental health warning. That this is a serious problem in the U.S. population. That people that are suffering from depression and anxiety and things like that, and that sports like paddling can be a huge benefit because you're getting all of those things that make people happy and healthy, right? There's the social aspect of it. There's the getting outside aspect of it. There's moving your body and being physical and connecting with nature. And so it's interesting how that the sport actually kind of has an important ameliorative kind of effect for a lot of people, a healing effect.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, I do want to get into some of the technical things about paddle making and talk about some, in case someone from the Hammer Factor is ever listening to this, we want to talk about feather.
They'd want to argue. They'd want to argue though.
Well, let's hit that one first. What is feather?
Okay, so
tell me, what is the ideal feather to the degree, the 10th of the degree?
So, despite the fact that a lot of people call feather offset, which it makes sense because yes, the blades are offset, but just to clarify, the best term is feather, because now that people are not necessarily making neutral offset paddles, i.e., we talk about forward offset, which means the blade is forward of the hand position. It's confusing. So it's really much better to use the term feather than offset.
So offset really refers to shaft offset, which means like a crank paddle, I think some people call it. Right?
Yeah, I've heard that term, but I think, I always talk about, forward offset basically, and how much that is, so anyway, but in regards to feather, the reason that whitewater kayakers use a feathered paddle and 30 degree is, and the reason why, I guess probably 90% of whitewater kayakers use a 30 degree feathered paddle is because of body mechanics, nothing else. It is the only reason. It's nothing to do with windage. So basically, your control hand, if you're right-handed, is your right hand, and when you put your blade in the water, the blade is perpendicular to your boat.
Mm-hmm.
When you rotate your hand over and you're still gripping with your right hand, if you stand up and hold a paddle and do this, like hold it with your right hand, don't have your left hand on it at all, and let it rotate over and as if you're going to take a forward stroke on your left hand side, and you don't touch it with your left hand, and you look down. If you've got a 30 degree feather blade and you look down, your blade will be perpendicular to where your boat would be. And it's because your wrist naturally twists like that. So and the thing is, if you use a paddle that's any less, when you less feather, it encourages you to do a low angle forward stroke. So if you're the reason that sea kayakers use a 15-degree paddle generally is because, with the small blades, and that's called low angle paddling. And when you do low angle paddling, when you're not twisting your arm up vertical, the blade doesn't twist as much. So if you use a low feather angle for whitewater, it discourages you from doing vertical paddle strokes. And if you're going to do a vertical paddle stroke on your left, you're more likely to do a vertical paddle stroke on your right. You don't paddle lopsided.
Right.
I mean, regardless of the feather, you're with your right hand or your control hand, it's always perpendicular.
Sure.
But so when you use a 45 or a 60, it really kind of enables and encourages you to do like over vertical strokes. But it's, like I can use a 45, I couldn't use a 60, but you are kind of twisting your wrist a bit more, but essentially the reason for feather is because of body mechanics and getting vertical forward strokes.
So why don't I go to 60 to 90? If some is good, why is more not better?
Because you'll have to twist your wrist. It's not natural. It becomes unnatural.
It gets into an uncomfortable position in the opposite. Right?
Yeah. Well, it's not. If you close your eye, the thing is, if you close your eyes and do it, like I just said, it's 30 degrees for everyone that I've ever done it to. Everyone who's wanted to argue with me about feather angle, I'm like, okay, hold this paddle, close your eyes, do this exercise, and now open your eyes and look at the blade, and it's like, oh yeah, it's in the right position. It's like, okay, let's not talk about it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be, full disclosure, I when you lent me that paddle several years back, I got to the end of the run and I was like, I've been paddling Werner paddles forever, and this thing feels great. Like this is fixed, like all the things I don't like about the Werner paddle. And I was like, I'm going to buy one of these when my paddle breaks. And I did. And I paddle one now. And so I'm going to be a little bit of a yes man, I think, to a lot of the stuff you say, because I think I like the philosophy of these paddles and what you've done. But I think I first heard about the roughly 30-degree feather angle from, Jim Snyder, right? That makes the Jimmy Sticks paddles.
Okay.
He had I don't know if it's still out there, but he had a web page a long time ago that I read that talked about this, and he basically said what you said, and he came to the conclusion that this was roughly the best angle. And I kind of did that drill at the time and thought about it a lot, and I said, yeah, that makes sense to me, and I've just stuck with 30-degree paddles ever since. But it's interesting how it's such a controversial subject.
Yeah. And one of the things is, sometimes I'll see someone with, like, on the river that I don't know, and I'll see them and I'm like, wow, they're really like have got a very low angle kind of forward stroke, and like the times that I've seen it and I've checked out, kind of carefully afterwards, and they're typically using a 0-degree paddle. I'm not saying everyone that uses a 0-degree paddle has a low angle forward stroke, but it just doesn't encourage you to do a high angle, a vertical forward stroke.
I think I wish I could remember this correctly, but I think this was actually on the Hammer Factor where they were discussing this 0-degree paddle, and I think John Grace was talking about, like, I don't see how that works unless you feather, like you have two control hands, you switch your control hands.
Yeah.
And I think they said that someone actually, there was some video of some old slalom paddlers, maybe it was even EJ or somebody where they had video of like some slalom paddlers that actually kind of did this when they paddled. They actually kind of like switched their control hands back and forth, which I thought was pretty interesting, but that's a pretty big cognitive load to.
Why do what's natural.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've actually, because I do sell a lot of paddles to people that are maybe not been paddling that long, or anyway, I have had that question a lot. And if you look on the website, I've actually got quite prominently displayed, why do we use a 30-degree feather? And I've got that explanation. And since I've put that up there, I have not had the question, should I get a zero? What feather paddle should I get? It's pretty much, I mean, I get it. Like a lot of people, especially, people that started paddling a long time ago, started with 45 and that's what they're used to.
Mm-hmm.
And like as I say, I could use a 45, no problem. But, and play boating, sure, a zero is great for play boating. Right. Leaf's using a zero at the moment. Natalie just she was using a 15, and now she's like, I'm going to try a zero. And like any flat water move works better with a zero. And, when you don't do vertical paddle strokes when you're play boating. So, get a zero. But, if you're river running or you're creeking, just get a 30 and keep things simple. For me also.
Well, let's get into the Hammer Factor's second favorite topic, which is paddle length. How do I know what the right length paddle is for me?
Wow, that's a big question. Yeah, I mean, I've written up a rough guide on our website as to what I think, and it's not so much what I think, it's what I find, people use, what kind of height, basically. I'm just using height, obviously wingspan comes into it and shoulder width, but I don't, like, if you're saying like what length, I'm not going to say if you're 6 foot you should use a 200, or if you're under 6 foot you should use a 197. I think the thing to think about is hand position, and that is crucial for vertical paddle strokes as well.
Mm-hmm.
If your hand position is too wide, you cannot comfortably and effectively get a vertical paddle stroke.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is, and once again, there's a very simple kind of thing you can do standing up, just to give you the feeling of it. If you grip your paddle really wide and then try to do what would be a vertical paddle stroke, you'll find that your arm, basically your bicep, will hit your forehead, and because it's too wide,
mm-hmm.
right? So, but if you choke up a little bit to the right position, your arm, your elbow will bend and your forearm will be in front of your forehead. And when you're paddling and you're comfortable with where your hand is, it's close to the water, and your elbow is basically bent across in front of your forehead, then your hand spacing is right. So if you're using a bent shaft, then whatever paddle, if you're using our paddle, I've got the measurements of the paddle where the hand spacing is. Bent shafts, the hand spacing does not change in regards to the end of the blade. So, and all the paddles, all manufacturers do the same. Mm-hmm. So there's that. And if you're using a straight shaft where you've got a bigger range of where you can grip, then you need to be gripping in that comfortable position where your spacing is about right. And people used to talk about, put the paddle on top of your head and your elbows should be at right angles.
Yeah,
but if you do that, if you do that, you will find that it won't be comfortable to do a forward stroke. Your bicep will hit your head.
Too wide.
You'll be stretching out. It's kind of weird, and you have The other thing about having too wide a hand spacing is that it slows the speed of your strokes. So you can't do fast strokes. But if you have a paddle, you figure out your hand spacing, and then you need, depending on the paddle and on the blade and how strong the catch is, and how strong you are, if the blade is too far from your hand, you'll be overpowered by it.
Yeah.
And so that paddle will be too long. So it needs to be, you need the sweet spot, you need the power spot of the blade in basically the right distance from your hand, so that you can use all your power and get the blade going through the water fast, but you need to be able to pull it through fast, reasonably effortlessly. If it's too long, it'll be so much effort and you won't be able to get it to go through that fast. So it's like driving up a hill in fourth gear.
Right.
You need the right, it's like that.
Yeah,
you need the right gear.
Right leverage ratio on it. Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm not going to tell anyone, whatever height they are, depending on what paddle they're using, what paddle length to use. You just need to know all these things, and then you will figure it out. But knowing that, you will also know that if you're 5'5", a 200 centimeter paddle is too long for you.
unless you're Dane Jackson, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. All right. Well, you heard it here. That's the best explanation I've heard.
And the one thing I just got to say, I have had people that have ordered paddles that are too long for them and they want to return them. I have never had anyone order a paddle that they wanted to return because they said it was too short.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, because you can deal with a paddle that's too short. It just pushes your hands together a little bit, maybe. But if it's too long, you're overpowered. It's ungainly, unwieldy. If you're upside, you like, it's not.
And
it's not comfortable.
And your bench shafts have the bend in a place where you can put your hands together a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, our bench shafts have got a longer grip, and they're definitely significantly narrower than a Werner bench shaft, which,
very noticeable.
Yeah, I'm not dishing it. I'm just saying most people find the Werner bench shaft, the grip, the hand spacing to be too wide. And even an AT is still their hand spacing. So really, when you talk about hand spacing, it's the distance of the grip to the power face of the blade their hand spacing is wider than ours. Ours is even a little narrower, and no one has complained about it, and everyone likes it. It's kind of in the sweet spot where most people want to paddle these days.
That was my experience for sure.
Yeah.
That was my experience. All right, I'm worried we could go on all night on this stuff, but
yeah. Okay, just move on.
But quickly, like we mentioned bench shaft and straight shaft. How important do you think? What's the trade-off? Why would you go with one or the other?
So when you're an old coot like I am, and your body has had a pretty hard life, I mean, the thing about a bench shaft, all it's doing is putting your wrist directly in line with your forearm so that you're pulling straight. So, and it allows you to grip the paddle with your whole hand. So whereas a straight shaft, I don't know about, maybe young people can grip it with their whole hand. If I grip a straight shaft with all my fingers, I get like within 50 strokes, my wrists get sore. So the only way I can grip it is with basically my two forefingers and my thumb. So there's no way I can put all my force into paddling if I'm only gripping a shaft like that. So, the ergonomics of it allow you to have full contact with the paddle and maybe a lot of the time you don't need that, but sometimes you do.
Sure.
So yeah,
what's the trade-off there? Obviously, if there's a little more work to make a shaft that has a bend in it, so there tends to be more cost involved.
Sure,
but is there a strength compromise, weight compromise?
In my shafts, no. In other shafts, yes. So in hollow shafts, like a hollow straight shaft is made on a mandrel, so it's wrapped around a mandrel, and the mandrel's pulled out. So it's like the mandrel. It's like a mold on the inside.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
And it can be one piece, and as you know, or most straight shafts are one piece. But when you make a hollow shaft bent shaft, it's made in a two-piece mold, and there's a balloon, like a bladder, which the carbon, usually just carbon fiberglass, whatever, composite sleeves are slid over it with resin. They're laid in the mold's closed over it, the bladder's inflated, and it pushes the composite tight against the mold. So it has to be it has to have a join in the middle. So, and typically a join is, it affects the flex to some small degree because it's a stiff point, because there's a sleeve inside it. It's double the thickness. And it hard points, when something's put to its extreme limit before it breaks, it'll generally break at a hard point, and a hard point is where there's a joint.
That's interesting. I never thought about how that process works, why they have to do it jointed in the middle like that.
And so, for example, paddles like ATs and Lettmans, they make the blade and the shaft that's all in one mold, but the shaft is still has an inflatable sleeve in it to make it hollow, but they don't have to have a join at the blade.
I see.
Which traditionally is a weak point, but it doesn't have to be. Like, for example, I've never had one of our paddles that, to my knowledge, break at the junction of the blade and the shaft, but it depends how you do it.
Gotcha.
And there's less leverage there, because at that point you've only got like a foot of blade. It's not like the middle of the paddle.
Sure. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's get into paddle shape, because if you look at your, that was one of the most noticeable things for me when I just picked it up and looked at it for the first time. The shape looks very different than, at least maybe not some of the brand new ones, but the typical Werner blades that you see on the Powerhouse or one of their other popular paddles. What's your philosophy on shape?
So it's a teardrop shape basically, and it's slightly asymmetrical, i.e., it's one side is slightly different shape to the other, but it's quite rounded. And the philosophy behind that, is that it's all about having the smallest blade you can with the strongest catch. And I'm not going to talk about power as we normally talk about blades being powerful, because honestly, you are the power. The blade is the traction in the water.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we really call that the catch. Does it catch the water? How much water does it spill? So really, ultimately, the smaller the blade is, the better, because it can be lighter. It can be, when you're underwater getting trashed in a hole, it has less force on you. It's easier to set up for a roll. It's easier to feather in the water. It's easier to do a doofek. It's easier to do any kind of a draw stroke or anything, the smaller it is, because it's not some big wing hanging out in the water there for you.
Mm-hmm.
So our philosophy is make a small blade that has got the strongest catch possible. But so to have a strong catch, so I'm going to go straight into dihedral here because it's all part of it.
Yeah.
So dihedral is basically the way that the blade slopes away from the center line so that the water spills off it.
Mm-hmm. So something with no dihedral at all would just be effectively flat across that center line.
Exactly, directly, totally flat.
So the higher up it comes, that in the center, the more dihedral it has.
Exactly. So you really need some dihedral to have a well-balanced blade, but you want to have as little as possible. And having the dihedral at the narrowest part of the blade, like so with our blades, they're quite teardrop shaped, and there is significant dihedral up towards the neck, but that's not the power section of the blade. That is the part of the blade that it helps it to balance. So the power section of the blade, obviously the further down it is, the better, because you can have a essentially shorter paddle, but the power is at the end of the blade, or the force. So you don't need as long, like if you have a blade that a lot of the power is towards the neck, or a lot of the catch is towards the neck, then it's closer to your hand, so you don't have this, it's a different leverage.
Right.
So that teardrop shape is just like the ideal shape to get, so then having that rounded shape that is, slightly asymmetrical, it stops the water spilling off the blade unevenly and in an erratic fashion. When you have sharp corners, like any hydro or aerodynamic expert they know about that. It's like that's like things that are square or have sharp corners, wind or water spills off it erratically, and that creates flutter. So to compensate that, you have to have more dihedral.
Yeah.
And so essentially you're spilling
you have
water.
to make a bigger blade if you want more catch.
And then instead of pulling your boat past your blade, which has good catch in the water, you're part of what you're doing is pulling the blade through the water. So you're wasting energy. And you have to do a faster stroke to get the same forward propulsion. You can do a slower stroke and get the same forward momentum with a blade that has a strong catch. Yeah.
Let's talk about the symmetry a little bit, the symmetric versus asymmetric, because you said yours are slightly asymmetric. Why not make it perfectly symmetric? What's the compromise?
Because people would totally freak out.
It's just pure marketing.
I mean, I can't. We haven't tried it, and when Andrew, he was the one that designed it. I honestly didn't have a whole lot of input into the design, and I think he really nailed it, in my opinion. And I think it's maybe partly luck, but I guess when you're doing something by trial and error, if you get it right and it works, it's right.
For sure.
Yeah. So I would be very interested to actually try making a completely symmetrical blade. And I have noticed, and I'm not certain about it, but there's definitely a lot of the slalom blades are looking very rounded, and it appears that some of them may be completely symmetrical. And if you're paddling in water, it doesn't really matter whether it's got an angle. People talk about it having a nice angle so that when you put it in shallow water, you get more paddle in the water. But I mean, let's be honest, if you're paddling on rocks, you might as well use a broomstick.
Yes, everything goes out the window then. Out here in Colorado, that's how we paddle. So we should just switch to broomsticks. At least most of the year, except for that 1 month of runoff. Yeah, that's interesting. Seems like that's something that's evolving.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely. I definitely think it is. And like our blade, it is actually, if you put a straight edge across the power face of it, it's actually slightly double concave. But so it's like double concave. It's got a slight high point in the middle, but the outsides of the edge towards the sort of center of the power section of the blade come up as well. So they don't. So they're catching the water. And I mean, unless you had if you could visually see what was happening when you pull the blade through the water. I mean, I'm sure it's circulating or it's doing something. Whatever it's doing, it's smooth, and anyone that owns a hardcore paddle will tell you it's perfectly balanced, or it's as perfectly balanced as it can be compared to a lot of paddles, and it helps with tendonitis because you don't have to grip it to control it.
Right. Yeah.
Which actually, just while I'm there, virtually all paddles these days, all the newer paddles have forward offset, whereas, certainly 15 years ago, and virtually all the older Werner paddles had neutral offset.
Mm-hmm.
And, people were pretty reluctant to go to forward offset because it does have its pros and cons, for a race paddle, having a lot of forward offset, it basically allows you to plant the blade further forward, closer to your toes, and the power part of your stroke is from your toes to your hip. So the longer you can get that stroke, the more effective you are. But the other thing it does is it helps to balance the blade, because you're pulling from essentially behind the blade. So that helps to have the blade to stop it from fluttering, and it stops you having to control it. But because it's offset, when you do a defect, there's more leverage on it. So if you have, so when you're doing anything like that, it's a little more twitchy, and it's a little more, it's a little harder to control.
I can picture that. Yeah.
So, and having, having some forward offset is, I think, for an everyday paddle is a good thing. Having too much is probably too much, unless it's a race paddle. So there's a happy medium.
Yeah. I mean that leaning forward, pulling in at your toes, all of that just that's 101 in aggressive paddling position. So that makes sense a lot to have a little help with that.
Yeah.
But I could picture that if you exaggerated that to an extreme and tried to take vertical strokes and defect and stuff, I could imagine that would feel very strange.
Yeah, it's sort of hard to control. And the other thing about it and I've had this, I've like sold paddles to people that have never used a forward offset paddle, and our paddles are slightly forward offset. The bent shaft a little bit less than the straight shaft.
Okay.
Is that when you hold it loosely in your hands in front of you or across when you're not paddling with it, because the blades are, they want to fall down basically, and so the paddle wants to fall with, so the blades are flat, and like that is, I mean, when you're paddling it makes no difference whatsoever, but like people are pretty sensitive about change. I've had people like, oh, it's really weird, when I hold it loosely in my hands, it wants to roll in my hands. I'll just hang on to it and paddle with it, and it'll be fine, and you'll enjoy it.
There's all kinds of things I hadn't thought about. That's interesting. I think I really experienced that with I grabbed someone's Galasport paddle for a little bit once, and I think that they must have a lot of forward offset on that, because I felt that phenomenon holding
Yep.
it. Yeah.
Definitely. That's very significant on a gala sport.
Yeah. What about edging? Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think anyone that's paddled Werner for a while has kind of maybe gone through the same evolution I did, where they whittle down their blade to this little toothpick, and it's almost like a frog in the pot, where you're like, one day you take a stroke and you realize you're not grabbing any water with it anymore, and maybe it's time to get a new paddle. I in fact went and got one of their foam cores after years of paddling, the fiberglass ones, just for that reason. I was just tired of whittling my blades down, even though I didn't particularly like the foam core feel better, even though I know some people say they do.
Yeah, so it's definitely, as far as I know, our blade is the only non-foam core Dynel edged blade, which, I mean, they don't last forever either, particularly if you smash them very hard on rocks. Like, you can take multiple hits, but or wearing them out on concrete. People like like Dynel is so tough, but concrete wears it away. So if you are sliding a Dynel edge paddle in a concrete play park, it will wear it away.
Really?
Believe it. But yeah, it's well, for me, it's the solution to having a paddle that doesn't lose its performance, basically. Because, I mean, even if you got the same lifespan from a Dynel edged paddle as you did from a non-Dynel edged paddle, very quickly you lose performance with a non-Dynel edged paddle, because it's wearing, and it's not wearing evenly, so it's becoming imbalanced. It's like, it's really not ideal, and you should be able to get at least twice the life out of a Dynel edged blade as you can a non-Dynel edged blade. So to me, I mean, obviously you could lose it or break it, but if you want a paddle that performs until you retire it, get a Dynel edged paddle.
Can you not put that? I mean, do you have to have a certain thickness to the blade or something to put that edge on? Like, why don't they do that on the fiberglass blades on a Werner or other types of paddles?
Well, I mean, our blades are essentially a non-foam core blade, and I mean, you've seen it. It's I mean, our molds accommodate that, and it's time consuming to lay up. It's can be problematic. I mean, we've pretty much got it dialed, so it doesn't give me problems anymore. But anymore, and it adds weight also, because that Dynel it's not that heavy, but it soaks up the resin, and the resin is what's heavy. But I mean, for example, I've cut up quite a few other paddles, and the foam core blades that I've weighed compared to ours are all heavier, not by a lot, but people think that foam core blades are light, but they're it's full of foam, and foam's not air. It has to have a reasonable density for it to not compress, and then you have to put layers of carbon or glass or composite over them, and that adds weight. And like the fact that when a foam core, for example, our blades have got twice as much thickness in the blade as a foam core has on one side. So and if you could punch a hole through it, which I've never seen, it wouldn't matter. You could drill a hole through it. It's not going to fill the core up, the foam core up with water.
Right.
So I don't know why no one else is making a non-foam core Dynel edged blade, but for people that are, especially guys on the East Coast, they like them because they hit rocks regularly.
Sure. Yeah. A feel like we could go on and on. But I have one more question that I'm curious about because, well, you mentioned Lettman, right? Like that people are loving Lettman paddles these days.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know. I paddled one a little bit once and it felt good, but I wasn't going to shell out, new car prices for my paddle. Not when I can get one for a fraction of the price. But one of the things that is kind of cool about those is they have the adjustability, right? Like you can adjust the feather, you can adjust the length on those, which seems pretty nice.
Yeah.
Like have you ever considered something like that, or do you think that there's compromise that's not worth it in making that adjustability?
I mean, with our shaft construction, there's no way that I could do it. It would essentially mean that the whole thing, like it's so much of it has to be hollow that it's like it just
wouldn't fit together in any reasonable way.
Work. And I mean, I haven't done a brake test, but I would be amazed if that style of two-piece, which I mean, they're not the only ones that do it. Gala Sport, their two-piece is the same, adjustable feather, adjustable length, and it's a very simple way to make a paddle because it's the same paddle.
Yeah.
The one problem with it is that they do often slip. I mean, I haven't owned one myself, but I know I've had a lot of friends that have, and it's like, they're constantly, they'll go through a gnarly rapid and the feather, there's not an actual physical locking device. It's just relying on the clamping, and you're clamping a hollow shaft. So how tight can you clamp that before it?
Yeah. It seems like they get some water in them too. Like
I don't know about that.
Yeah. I've heard people get like tiny bits in maybe less Lettman, but someone had a select paddle or something that I picked up, and I was like, "There's water in this shaft," and they're like, "Oh yeah, that happens, but it's just a little bit."
Yeah. I mean, it's not a big area, but I guess if it filled up completely, it would be significant.
Yeah. I was just curious about that because it's interesting, and I mean, just the transportability of the two piece is nice too, right? It's nice to be able to break it down and make it shorter. But
yeah, I mean, the other problem with those types of two piece is that one is significantly longer than the other.
Oh,
significantly longer than the other. Like that's just the way that they are, the way they have to be, basically. Because
it must mess a little bit with balance, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I don't think that's too much of an issue, but it's more of the like storability and what have you. And like the thing with that when I made our two piece is that they're both halves are exactly the same, and they do actually fit in a creek boat, so you can use it as a breakdown.
It's be a breakdown.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. If you have been using a kind of a high performance paddle and you have to go and you're on a hard run and you have to go to a 4-piece fiberglass breakdown, it's a little scary.
I think we've all been there at some point in our lives.
Exactly.
I really wish I had a different paddle.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I don't have anything more on that. I mean, I probably could, but I think that covered it very well. I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb here and say that this is the best paddle analysis that's ever been done on a whitewater podcast.
Well, I don't claim to be an expert, and I don't want anyone arguing with me.
I'd love to agree with
me. That's fine.
I'll field the counter arguments. I'd love to hear the arguments against. As long as the argument is more than just, oh, you have to try it, and then you'll understand. Well, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate you spending the time to go through everything and talk about this. Love talking about the paddles. Love your stories. And you probably, I mean, this isn't not an advertisement for hardcore paddles. You probably have more orders than you want to have right now. But I love the paddles, and it's been a great shift, and I don't have any intention of going to a different paddle at this point.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, it's been good chatting with you, and my voice is hoarse, so I must have been talking for too long. So yeah, let's call it a night.
All righty. Well, thanks again, Mike. Take care.